The real impetus of the art of the Yellow House was the joy of creation. I don't think any of the artists ever really believed that their work would, become the sort of art that was sold and the prices rose year by year. They did it partly as an act of defiance to that attitude. They did it to celebrate the ever-regenerative quality of the human spirit. They also did it to honour art of the past and immediate past, which they found particularly inspiring and renewing. It's interesting that a mere 20 years later, a whole new public is able to respond to this art to the degree that perhaps it would be viable in the art market.
Hello, Poppy. How are you?
That's Electra. I'm Poppy.
Poppy. Sorry.
That's alright.
And this is Valerie.
Hi.
Poppy and Electra. They're going to make a video as we go through the Yellow House, okay? Let's go. Look at your hat, Electra.
Oh.
Ultraviolet.
Yeah. You pop. Oh. Don't want to? Okay.
Oh. Now what?
Now what do you want to show me? Through here?
Through the fur tunnel. Want to go through and want to go behind. Will she make it through the wall? Yes? Yes? Very good, Valerie. Okay.
Where to next?
What else do we see? What about the mirror with the video? You get your head down, Poppy, level with Electra's.
Just usually something. Got it?
It's not the perfect frame.
You don't want that kind of signature. Just drop down. There's some little girls in there. Let's go in now and grab some of these other details.
Okay.
How's it? Pull out. Now when you're ready, come through. I'll give you a hand there. Wide, are we on the...
I'm as close up now.
I'll get the wide.
I've got the wide already.
Go back. Hold on. Did you get the shot where you used the brush? It's on the wide just now. So let's go over here while we check. Tilt down, give me a shot of all the paint, just see the shoes. Just cut. I just shoot it. You got most of it, haven't you? You've got the eye in the middle.
Up in Melbourne in about 1963 or 4 in the Art Gallery, and he was in Melbourne as a guest of Georges and Mercamora, who appreciated both his real art and his relationship with popular art or comic art or newspapers even. And I must remember, this is before Oz. This is actually before Oz happened. I think Oz magazine, well, they might have been at the same time. I think Oz was probably going about 62, 63, 64. I know I wrote for Oz in 64 or 66 at the invitation of Richard Neville, an article which said, well, London's going to be the new centre of where things are happening, which was just one of the reasons that that particular group went to London. Now, the London experience is really crucial to an understanding of the Yellow House, because whilst in London, Martin shared a house with Richard Clapton and a couple of other rock musicians and artists. David Allen, a jazz guitarist from Melbourne, lent his guitar to Jimi Hendrix, for instance, and Jimi Hendrix went into the studio and made his first great and immortal album. Martin started doing record covers for Cream, in which I think Clapton played with Ginger Baker and others, and I think it was Keith Richard of the Rolling Stones told me in 1966 that you could get high on what was on John Lennon's collar. But now, whilst in London, Martin Sharp became one of the world's leaders of psychedelic art. Martin's posters then and today are recognised as the most significant psychedelic art of the 60s, and there are constant books and anthologies of psychedelic posters, psychedelic art produced overseas, in which one of Martin's posters will be the cover. He gets nothing for this. He doesn't even. He gets an acknowledgement, Mark. You know, his poster of Jimi Hendrix or his poster of Dylan or something, but he gets no money from it. Whilst he was in London, he produced a wonderful collection of collages in a book called Art, which is on display here under the glass counter in the Yellow Room. And when he came back to Australia, it was very much filled with the genuine ecumenical vision of the 60s, that all religions were one, and that all cultures were one, and that all arts were one. And this was the spirit that created the Yellow House. Now, people were able to be in the Yellow House as either artists or appreciators if they wanted to be. The only criterion was their own genuine interest in what was actually going on. Now, from my point of view, there were far too many kind of runaway girls who were there because Martin had other ideas for them. And there would be, in the back room there was a long refectory type table, and there would be like Martin and 6 or 7 girls who patently couldn't draw, patently had no visual perception whatsoever, but they were pretty, so they were there. Then there was David Litvinov, who was from an East End working class background in London, who actually, I'm not sure of the chronology, whether it was later or I think it was just before he'd come here. He had written out the first story of the script that became Performance, a film with Mick Jagger and James Fox. A very interesting film that had to do with what we would now call the dark side of the moon or the dark side of the psyche, which at the time was perceived as having something to do with wholeness of being, the marriage of animus and anima within the psyche. Mick Jagger, for instance, becomes a transvestite momentarily, and men and women exchange roles, bodies, and the dark and the light are seen as two interconnected sides of the one wholeness. Now, David wrote the first draft of this story, which was about the Chris brothers, or whatever. They now tell the real story, you see, about those English guys who've been in jail, terrible murderers. And they heard about this, and he was actually molested. They said, "You're the smiler, aren't you? We'll give you something to smile about." And they cut his cheeks like this in the shape of a smile, and he had these scars. He came out here where all of a sudden he was a guru. All of a sudden, to these very naive Australians who thought all you had to do was be brilliant and you would immediately get world recognition, he said, there are agents, there are management companies, there is Lou Grade, there are these dope dealers who have money and need to launder it and set up this organisation and that. And he was surrounded by people who are still on the fringe of Sydney theatre and Sydney film. People like David Little and a boy who subsequently married a Turkish girl, but was taken. David Littlenoff was very homosexual. And Brett Whiteley did a series of drawings based on David Littlenoff's homosexual reminiscences of Morocco. And it seemed rather amazing to me in about 1972 that people were paying $1,400 for a bit of a scribble of David Littlenoff going down on some Moroccan boy. But it was Brett Whiteley and it was Robin Gurner's gallery, and away you go. And all of this was sort of a part of the Yellow House. Brett Whiteley was in the Yellow House for totally the right motives. So, apart from his interest in the girls who couldn't draw, was Martin Sharp. Bruce Gould, who we now recognise as quite a major visual artist, printmaker and designer of prints and fabrics and things of some considerable note, was then a sort of still not quite formed. I'd met Bruce Gould in 1966. He came down to Melbourne from Newcastle, where I introduced him to the members of Bob Dylan's The Band, and they said, "Oh, he's a blonde Bobby," and it was everybody was trying to get Bruce Gould and Bob Dylan together because they all felt this is Robbie Robertson and Ricky Danko. They felt that that Bobby would be amazed to find this blonde alter ego. And Bruce wasn't then a painter, he was more of a dancer, an expressivist, which he did at the Yellow House. He danced up and down the stairs, dressed and undressed. Do you remember those marvellous? And then there was Sylvia and the Synthetics, which was, a precursor to sort of punk theatre, really. It was transvestite, anti-establishment, all of which was totally in the spirit of Vincent van Gogh and this sort of doing away with art as commerce, art as a product, art as the special concern of the haute bourgeoisie. The thing that I felt, I did things like I brought Ravi Shankar into the Yellow House in 1970. He had a Sunday afternoon concert in Melbourne, in Sydney Town Hall, which he loved because it gave him the opportunity to play morning rags, because it was before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so he was ecstatic about that. And he said, "I'd like to walk around King's Cross," and I arranged a few discreet girls who later on became devotees of Maharaji, very, very strong devotees. And so 2 years later, they became very strong devotees of Maharaji. But, and we just walked through the cross. I said, "Here's this." See, my feeling was that all this really great art was going on in this decaying building, and it wasn't being appreciated and it wasn't being paid for. I very seldom went to the evening performances because I was then working as a publicist for rock bands and I had commitments elsewhere, but I would often go to the Yellow House during the day when the drawing lessons were going on or when Martin was painting the wall. But this was a late afternoon on the Monday after Ravi's concert. We went in, both Ravi Shankar and Alaraka came in with me, and Martin had been to the concert, and actually Martin really appreciated Alaraka. He thought that Ravi Shankar had a bit of an ego. And when Ravi went for a piss, Martin, sort of halfway up this ladder, turned to Alaraka and said, "Oh, you're really it. You've really got it, as for him." Which I thought was a little unfair, because Ravi's really done some good work over the years. And they also appreciated the incredible degree, as we've seen, like in the Stone Room and in this room. And I remember the Hokusai room being much bigger, much larger than it is now, and thinking just how absolutely wonderful this work. This is Greg Waite and Vicky Waite's work, and as well as Brett's, as well as Martin's. I don't remember seeing any of the puppet performances, though I knew they went. I knew Bruce rather than George at that stage. And I was, but I mean, and I also never attended the poetry readings there, though I would read things at lunchtime for some of them. But there's a photo on one of the panels here of Patrick Alexander, a Melbourne poet who is actually of English extraction, and his elder brother is the British High Commissioner to Austria. His mother at the stage lived in Melbourne, and his brother was in the diplomatic service, and Patrick is manic depressive, and like many manic depressives rather plays on that. But the family always bought him suits and paid his rent. So Patrick, who was always a bohemian, again I've known him since about 1961, and was very at the height of hippiedom, in just before the Yellow House in the late 60s, in gay liberation marches and poetic and political demonstrations in parks. Here's everybody wearing their op-shop clothes, and Patrick in his fading suit that the family used to buy him. But he did read there. He is a reader of the old school, of the ranting and raving school of English acting, which he studied seriously many years ago. He's about 48 or 50 now. He still performs around Melbourne. He still performs in sort of fringe poetry events and libraries around Melbourne. Julian the Mime, of course, came from New Zealand. Do you know all this? Has this also been...
I'm sure Roger knows.
You know, Julian the Mime, of whom there are photos there.
She's still around.
No, Julian is a bloke. Oh. Excuse me, you're talking about Moth, so sorry. Please don't butt in if you don't know what you're saying. Right. Julian, Jewel as in gem, I-O-N, is now a pastry cook in Melbourne and works as occasionally has worked as a cultural officer with Koori groups in the same. But I mean, like everybody who deals with Kooris who isn't black and doesn't speak the language, he found it very frustrating. But he's passed out of performing. He went from the Yellow House to do very delicate mime work in rock venues, which amazed me because it really was, and I mean, to castigation and booze and catcalls and violence. He also used to do little mime performances with Jeannie Lewis, particularly when she sang that wonderful song about the white blouses. Remember that one, the white blouses? Jeannie Lewis used to sing quite a lot here. In French, something or other blanc, blues blanc or something. But it's a very dramatic, rather sad. It's about the white blouses, the sort of, the clothes people wear in the madhouse. It's a song about people breaking down. And Julian used to tour with her and perform in her concerts. And he then went to England and appeared in a few films for a Melbourne filmmaker called Chris Lefane, who's now working in... Chris Lefane made 20th Century. Chris Lefane is David Williamson's brother-in-law and secretly wrote 80% of the script. But these were the sort of people who were involved marginally in the Yellow House. They were all then very young. Moth was in fact a waitress at the health food restaurant where we all ate at the time. And I remember she came up to me very discreetly after the first night of Hair in 1969 and said, "Who is Margaret Mead?" I told her. And she was a mime student. She wasn't ever terribly good, but she also went overseas and came back with an English husband. And yes, Howard. Harold. Hello, Harold.
It's good he should come in.
You'll get Harold in the yellow room here. But so what had fed Martin's vision of the Yellow House was his experience of art here, but also in Europe. So, in London he was also connected with Amsterdam, where Harold now constantly goes to paint and to manifest. And the thing is that at the time in 1970, in terms of selling and public reputations and all of that, Vincent van Gogh was a bit of a no-no. I mean, Rembrandt was getting the vast, amazing price of $11 million per canvas, but Vincent van Gogh wasn't. Now, many of the people who were in the Yellow House are still functioning. I think Dickie and Greg Waite you know, work as photographers and work in movies, and they paint scenery, doesn't Dick does, yeah. Dick and Alan Craft I often see on film sets when I have the odd day in a movie. And Martin has since then produced really wonderful posters. I mean, a whole oeuvre of posters which really do make him to Australian culture what Toulouse-Lautrec is to French culture. They really are of that quality. I don't know what Julia's doing, but I think surely she's recreated these feather items.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Made a feather ladder this time.
A much better lady. Peter Kingston, as we know, has a very successful career. I'm still doing poetry and a little bit of acting hither and yon. What's changed, I think, is that the sort of genuine psychedelia that this represented, well, I mean, most actual psychedelic art was superficial. It was simply very inept romanticism. Martin, because he was a true artist, from which, to which he honours Justin O'Brien, which is why the photograph of Justin O'Brien is on the wall, because Justin was his art teacher at Cranbrook, so that he grew out of, and again, Justin O'Brien's art, which was rubbished in the 60s, is still going, whereas all the people who rubbished him have disappeared into art schools or the Greek islands and are virtually unknown. You see, all the abstract expressionists that sprang out of Charles Thingamajig, his name doesn't come to my tongue now, but Justin O'Brien is still painting, still having retrospectives and still being honoured. And so there was, because Martin had this basis in real picture making, even his psychedelic work, I mean his posters for Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan are just genius, really genius quality. And the posters he's done subsequently here in Sydney over the last 12 years, I think are absolutely wonderful. The tapestry in the library, I think is, I mean, even in a sense, he just juggles his own motifs around and around, but the finished product has an amazing quality. The sort of psychedelia that Mr. Fogg and Fog Lights produce is a natural outgrowth of the psychedelia that was crystallized in the Yellow House in those 2 years that it was operative. And of course, the reputation of Vincent van Gogh has enlarged enormously. He now gets, sales of $75 million a painting. So the world is now responding to Vincent van Gogh. And I think it really is an instance of something being 20 years ahead of its time. Because the response, you look at the book here, the response of kids today is that this is a pretty terrific free trip. This is a really great mind space to be in. And they're seeing it and enjoying it in exactly the same terms as we did in 1970 and 71.
What about filmmakers?
Well, I'm sorry I didn't mention the filmmakers. I suppose I should have, yeah. I'd been going to film societies since the early 50s, where one saw film as art, and in fact I remember in 1963 seeing The Trouble with Harry at a little film society that met in a boat shed near Milson's Point, just near Neutral Bay, where the where the atomic submarines, just over the road from the atomic submarines. And what a wonderful experience it was sitting in this tiny room, not much bigger than the room we're in now, with a 16mm print of The Trouble of Harry and the window open overlooking the sea, the bay. But yes, there was a film, as Roger rightly said, there was a strong component of filmmakers. But Ubu was about folding at about that time, wasn't it?
Ubu became city filmmaker.
Yes, but Ubu had happened before the Yellow House. Ubu's great period was like 67, 68, 69. And I think in 69 or 70 I produced the last Ubu News, which took 6 or 8 weeks to produce, and we had some incredible artwork with Gordon Much and a lovely guy, Tony Edie, who married that girl. And we produced a really, and we tied it in with Hair, because certainly the performance of Hair in Sydney, which began in June 69, seemed to be the herald of a new age of cultural and social you know, amplification and modernisation. And the fact that the Yellow House opened just after, and Hair was still running. Hair ran in Sydney till at least, it was over a year, because they had her first birthday party in June 1970, so it ran for about another 6 months. So sort of the Yellow House opened as Hair was happening, as Australian rock and roll was finally being recognised by large audiences, and actually people were earning a living as rock musicians, and groups like Tully, and for whom I also acted as publicist, and the La-Di-Da's, could command real audiences and actually make a living as rock musicians, not have to sell guitars during the day or work in music shops. But the filmmakers went on. I mean, Albie Toms is still making films. Aggie Reed is teaching film at university in South Australia, I think at Flinders. Ubu Film became the Filmmakers Co-op, which has since also kind of folded, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's been taken over by film school, and, you know, they're...
Well, the women's movement discovered
That's the point. What else should we talk about, Roger?
I think maybe what we need to do now is perhaps if you walk through.
Yep, sure.
With the camera following you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Near you.
Yeah, we just chat. I think that's great. Yeah.
As you spot things. This is.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's go to the camera. Let's go to the phone.
Maybe a bit too high.
Well, I thought it would be
testing.
Now, whilst this is an actual photograph of the Yellow House as it was in those days, in the processing the colour has got distorted, because I'm sure this was actually much more yellow. It wasn't as orange as that. Though this blue and white, I remember, as being that shade. That was the same as the cloud roof. But in the processing, the rich yellow has become a slightly bilious orange. Now, because at the time the cross was filled with American soldiers and Marines on R&R and prostitutes and rock musicians, etc., etc., very few people thought this was unusual or even took much notice, certainly during the day. I think socially, the Yellow House went lamentably unremarked for what it actually was. Now, if we go over here, again, this is more orange than it actually was at the time. At the time, it was much more gold. Here we have Martin's Eternity, which used to be, at that time, written in chalk on the pavement by Arthur Stace, a born-again Christian who was trying to remind people of reality, and whose life is recorded both in a book called Rat Bags and a wonderful poem called Arthur Stace by the late Douglas Stewart, which is a really great Australian poem. This is classic surrealism. This is basically a Magritte room, and it's in essence more Magritte than it is Dali. Here we have the Magritte lithographs that Martin had brought back from Europe. Martin's own paintings, by the looks of things here. These be Martin's, they look like. Here's little shrinky paintings, the shrinking show, yes. And a tribute preserved. I think it is on a screen, isn't it? Isn't this on a screen, Roger? Yes, well, that still exists. But at the time, I just thought this is so good. It would be awful if it just kind of stayed on these walls and didn't have a more permanent sort of existence. But there it is, it does exist. Over here, can you catch these?
So yeah.
This is a photograph of people as they were at the time. That looks like Julian the Mime there at the end, Albie Toms, Nicky Waite, I think, Peter Wright, George Gittos, Nick Lyon, I don't get to but Aggie Reed, Johnny Lewis, Ginger Meigs and Gretel Pinniger, otherwise known as Madame Lash. See, again, I think this works quite wonderfully, better than the way these have been reproduced. I rather think that Julia's feather, I mean, again, this is direct surrealism out of Dali and Dali's French followers. The archetypal one, of course, is the cup. the cup and saucer. Pardon? Yes, yeah. I think that's the ultimate expression of that sort of surrealism. But this white against the black and the black and white photographs, and here, you know, I think that whole black and whiteness of that is a profound aesthetic statement in itself. Well, we have managed to have this reproduced a bit. So that's again Magritte.
You can keep moving if you want. We'll follow you.
Yeah.
Whatever you
Now,
like.
is this reproduced in the room now? Because this, of course, is the much of George's inspiration was the Sufi tales of Nasruddin, who is really a kind of nonsense wisdom. I mean, but the Sufis in Los Angeles are very, very taken, and they actually have theatre and puppet on these same stories, these stories of Nasruddin, who is kind of the fool for God. So I think there was always that impetus behind the puppet. This again is a sort of genuine psychedelia that seems to be less superficial than most of the work that was produced immediately prior to it in the late 60s. But again, it's a populist, it's an inviting, opening up sort of art. It's not an exclusive, trying to frighten people away sort of thing. This room to me is just wonderful. It's really a masterpiece. And
well, we should go in the room and have a talk.
yes, we should do it in the room actually.
Okay, so
and
this one.
Is another. Well, this is just another dimension of the Magritte room. This is not a pipe, but this is a Belgium
salon.
Yes. Right. Is this a person or a mummy? Is that a person or a?
I think that's a dummy.
Yes, it's a dummy. Very Bruce Gould. It's interesting. The boy who's also up here, who's now dead, the magician, rock magician,
Jeff Crozier.
Yeah, Jeff Crozier used to create rooms like that at rock festivals. A bit, well, about the same time actually. Later on in 1970, at the Launching Place Festival, he had a tent that was a reproduction of this.
And he served cups of tea.
He did serve cups of tea. You've read my book.
I was there.
Oh, you were there. It was absolutely rainproof. We could shelter there. The rain. Yes.
He was prepared.
Absolutely prepared.
He knew it was going to rain.
Exactly. Actually, it was Wendy Saddington who served the tea. Wendy Saddington served tea off more. I mean, she was the sort of tea lady.
Jeff served tea to me.
Oh, good. Were you doing a light show there?
Yes.
Did you manage to get it on?
Oh, yes. We had waterproof lights. Oh, we weren't silly either.
Right.
We operated out of the back of the truck.
Yes. Wasn't that wonderful when Tully played? Tully played a wonderful sunrise or sunset music down at Launching Place. And the place was full of very, very... everybody was dressed like Morocco, all the hippies, and there were about 1,000 monks and nuns there from the Melbourne Church, which had embraced the theology of poverty, and they were all out to save the underdog, and they were really scared of all these Moroccan-looking hippies. Shall we go in the stone room? And rightly so.
Yeah, let's go in the stone room.
See, I mean, in a way, today people are more used to the concept of performance masks and works of art as masks which reveal the reality, which is the essence of this sort of performance here in the stone room.
Just let us position for that if we could. Okay. So just get a shot of this one, Valerie. I feel like I'm in the way here. Actually, I'm just going to.
Well, today I think more people are comfortable with the idea of the work of art as a mask, which reveals the reality of the human condition, which is the essence of this sort of a performance here, and here too, you see, where the very narrow and confined spaces of that little house were used. Whereas here we get a sense of, you know, this is it used to be the main gallery space when it was the Derry Clune Galleries. now here we have David Litvinoff, who, as an Englishman with experience of the reality of getting art to, to publication, was an invaluable teacher to everybody. Albie Toms, Peter Wright, and Dickie Waite. This is Moth, really a student of mine. Over here we have Jeff Crozier. This is Jeff Crozier, who subsequently died, having had quite a successful performance in New York. This is, of course, George and Gabriel as they were then. This is Julian the Mime, Martin, looking very, very rugged. Franklin Johnson. It's our beloved Dolly, is it not? Isn't that Dolly?
That Moth?
Is that Moth? It looks like Dolly to me.
I think it's Moth.
Is it Moth, is it? Well, is that really Julian? It could even be Franklin under that mask. You see, this is the thing, that the whole concept of masks. This is, I don't remember, do you remember this particular, were you there? There's Peter and Nicky Lyon playing, but who's this gorgeous? Yeah, and this is Albie, surely, isn't it? The hair looks like Albie.
No, I don't know who that is.
The hair looks like Albie. This isn't Bliss, is it? This is one of those many pretty girls that... But this looks like Julian here, actually. A slightly touched up photo.
A few pretty boys there too, I think.
Graham from Mullumbimby. Yes, he was there. He used to throw balloons around the place.
Well, shall we retire to the stone room?
Pardon?
Shall we retire?
As we saw in the original photograph, this room originally was black. Now it was a bit big. The original room was bigger than the space available here. So to make this more palatable to people today, they've left it mainly white. But to my mind, these wonderful black and white images, which are in fact tone-dropped, enlarged photographs or fragments of photographs, don't really have the same sort of immanence, the same presence as they did with the black background.
Okay. Cut double left.
Here, in another tribute to Merritt Oppenheim, we have the fur tunnel. It's been so well used in the gallery that it's almost coming apart there. But again, another disjunction of...
Okay.
All right. Now here we have another tribute to Merritt Oppenheim, another, by now, conventional disjunction of normal reality, when, if embraced lovingly, becomes an experience of great joy and expansion. In fact, all of this art was simply an attempt to try, through what is now a totally acceptable experiment, to extend the barriers or the parameters of what people would accept. And as people did more and more unusual things, they became able to understand more and more. Hello, here's another person coming through. Come on, there's a good girl. Yes, come on. Hooray. Very good.
That was great.
Good.